Gen Alpha, it, depending on who you ask, is the generation of kids born between roughly 2010, 2012, and 2025. So we have officially, according to sociologists, moved into the next generation named Gen Beta, which is the first reason why this generation is doomed. You're named Gen Beta. Mm-hmm. I believe strongly in nominal determinism. It either means you're the weaker generation, or maybe more optimistically, they're called Gen Beta in the spirit that a lot of new technologies will be tested on them. They're the lab rats for a lot of new parts of modern life.
Or like beta fish, they have to be by themselves.
Right, maybe isolation is an aspect of that. The year 2025 marks the beginning of a new generation in Generation Beta. Simply put, those born between 2025 and 2039. The most black-pilling part of this is I realize that my kids are going to be Gen Beta unless I'm fortunate enough to have my last like 1 or 2 kids in my 40s, which I guess will be Generation Gamma. But by 2035, it says they will make up 16% of the global population. They'll be the children of younger millennials and older Gen Zers, and many will live to see the 22nd century. So the first reason why Gen Beta is doomed, in my opinion, is that there are going to be a lot less of them than everyone else.
Okay, but let's not doom the babies.
I'm not. It's not my doing. It's out of our control. There are going to be a lot less Gen Betas than there are of Gen Alphas,
and there's already hardly any
Gen Alphas.
We basically have a population collapse.
It's already happened. There are, I believe, 40 million Gen Alpha Americans, which is something like half as many as there are of Gen Z. Gen Z also was a population collapse compared to millennials, and that's been a demographic trend for decades at this point. But there are not going to be many Gen Beta to begin with, so that's the first reason why they're doomed. They're also predicted to be the most digitally connected and least physically active of all time. Things like cash, driving cars, and books will not be a part of their lives as they are correspondingly replaced by digital payments, digital IDs, autonomous vehicles, and consumption of digital media instead of physical media.
Hanging out with friends is probably going to continue to diminish.
Right. They're also predicted to be the most medicated generation, surpassing Gen Alpha. That's somewhat attributed to rates of depression continuing and anxiety continuing to increase, which is largely blamed on increasing screen time. They're predicted to average 12 hours of screen time per day. Popular names for Gen Beta girls include Nova, Aria, and Luna. Popular names for Gen Beta boys include Kai, Leo, and Ezra. A lot of names are influenced by pop culture, down to popular TikTok aesthetics, widening parents' circles of influence. The baby naming process has gotten so much more creative while also sticking to long-held rules. Like if a name is embroiled in controversy, we'll see it drop from the spotlight. Some people have chosen the name Isabel because they like The Summer I Turned Pretty, actually. That's the name of the protagonist in that show. Or names like Rose and Jane rising in popularity have been credited to Beyonce's Cowboy Carter songs. So yeah, the names are not looking good for this generation. They're also going to be the most recorded generation in history. They're expected to experience less feelings of nostalgia because all of their memories are going to be captured in detail and comprehensively and stored online. And smaller attention spans are, I mean, that's already happening with Gen Alpha, but they're going to be shrinking more. They're going to have less capacity for storing memory. That's expected because they are going to rely on AI and large language models to recall both general facts about the world, but also facts about themselves, like personal information, phone numbers, addresses, and even their own names.
That's very creepy. They're going to rely on AI for information about their own lives.
Yeah, and the oldest Gen Beta right now, for context, is just shy of a year old. So I want to show this video on Instagram from a woman who works in childcare, having compared kids from 10 to 15 years ago to kids today. She's echoing these sentiments that a lot of them don't even know their own name.
Why?
Which is really worrying.
Why don't they know their own name?
They're either not being addressed by their parents very often, or they're being called nicknames oftentimes, or pet names. They have less interaction with adults. Primarily, that's the reason. So let's take a look here.
I've owned and operated a daycare center and taught 4-year-old preschool for 20 years. Okay. And I had a lady ask me today if I had seen a difference in kids today and the kids 10, 15 years ago. Well, yes, ma'am, I have. I'm going to tell you 10, 15 years ago, we were sending kids to school reading. Kindergartners were going in reading. They knew their sight words, okay? They knew a quarter, dime, a nickel, a penny, and knew the difference and the amount of it, okay? They could hold scissors. They could hold pencils. They could color inside the lines. They knew how to write their names correctly with uppercase and all lowercase. They could recognize their names. They recognized letters, uppercase, lowercase, and numbers. Today's kids, they can't hold scissors. They can't cut and rip paper. They have no clue and no consistency with any chore. They can't focus. But I know one thing they do know. They know how to operate a phone. They know how to turn an iPad on. They know how to put a password in, and they can play games on the iPad. But they don't recognize their own name. Is anyone else seeing this?
And you know, the worst part is a lot of the comments were saying, let kids be kids. They'll catch up. It's fine. No, it's not fine.
You don't really catch up.
It's really not fine.
There's definitely things where you don't.
They're saying it's not that the kids have changed, the parents have.
Look, it's proven that certain developmental stages are crucial and cannot be skipped, and they cannot be delayed. Everything here should be incredibly alarming to the adult generation. My understanding is that Gen Alpha is being called the iPad baby generation, and she is talking about Gen Alpha in this clip. But if we're talking about Gen Beta, who have just barely opened their eyes at this point, it's looking like the hardware of the technology that they will use and become accustomed to in their lives is going to change significantly, and it's not going to be tablets anymore. There have been significant jumps in like not just software, but the hardware that we interact with on a daily basis. Touchscreens is a huge part of that, and that's what Gen Alpha has grown up with. But maybe what Gen Beta is going to grow up with is something where you interface with it with spoken word and not tactile sensations. So that's worrying.
Did you see the clip with Elon Musk on Joe Rogan recently? It was like maybe a week or so ago. So Elon Musk was talking about how, you know, in just a couple of years, you're not going to have phones anymore.
Yes.
That phones will just be a vehicle for your AI, and that everything you do will be just you connecting and talking to the AI. And of course, with Neuralink, that could just be in your head. So we could just end up being blobs of meaningless body machines that don't know anything, where everything is integrated with something external to us, so that we have no native information or awareness. And that is a very creepy consideration. It's like WALL-E meets Idiocracy, just all rolled into one.
Meets Gattaca, meets like The Matrix, meets literally every other horrifying sci-fi story we're familiar with.
Yeah. And you wonder, like, how would human beings climb out of that hole? There's this great story. It was a short novel from E.M. Forrester, and it was like 1918 or something. I always get the year wrong, but it's something like that. And it's called The Machine Stops. And it's E.M. Forrester wrote this before there was a a phone before there was a smartphone, before televisions, before any of this stuff. And it's almost like he must have had a time travel device. So the earth has been polluted and nobody can live on the surface of the earth anymore. And everybody lives underground in these chambers. Everybody has their own. Everyone lives by themselves. Everyone has like a studio apartment. And you, when you need stuff, you ask the machine for it, and the machine will give it to you. And it's food, or, you know, have your sheets changed, or whatever it is that you want. And everyone has like a big telescreen in their little studio apartment underground. And you talk to your friends on the telescreen. And you give, you know, you're educated, you know, so everybody has seen the same movies. And what you do is you talk to each other about these things, and everyone will give lectures. So you'll give a lecture on a movie, and then your friend will give a lecture on your lecture on the movie. And then someone else will give a lecture on the movie. And it just goes back and forth like that, kind of like we're seeing now in the New York Times and the Washington Post and others, where everyone's just criticizing the last thing somebody else wrote. And then, so that's what happens. And in terms of reproduction, the machine will help you find a mate, right? So the machine basically has dating apps, and you go on a date with someone, and then you have the child, and then the child is raised elsewhere by the machine, and the machine decides where the child is raised. And yeah, so that's what life is like. And there's like sort of a train, but nobody ever uses it. So one day, Vashti, who's the woman that we're following, who lives in the studio apartment, her son reaches out to her via telescreen and it's like, you have to come talk to me. And she's like, oh, I actually have to leave my studio apartment. That is so stupid. And she goes and she gets on a train and she sees the earth, and she's all very creeped out by everything that's physical and real. She goes to find her son, and he's like, I have to be on the surface. I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this. And she's like, what is the matter with you? But then it actually turns out that the machine breaks down, right? The collapse of complex systems. And he manages to get to the surface, but he can't breathe the air. And so he dies. And so that's the story. But it's worth the read anyway, even though I just gave it away, because the ending is not really the point. The point is that this was written in 1918.
Wow.
And it is exactly... when you look at it, this is what's going on in our society now. And it kind of loops back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. This is being done to us, whether we want it or not. It's just being done to us. And I recently had this thought where, you know how you always look back in history and you're like, oh, why didn't the people say anything before the Nazis? Why didn't anybody resist? Why wasn't there any resistance? You know, why did these societies just let this happen to them? And then you realize that people were there and they were screaming their bloody heads off.
Right.
They were screaming at the top of their lungs, you know, in Mao's China. They were screaming at Stalin, at everybody else, probably at Pharaoh. And like nothing, it just didn't matter. Like, you can scream as loud as you want and they're still just going to cut your head off and then tell you to like it. Mm-hmm. Whether you, and yeah. Can it even be stopped? I mean, Elon Musk is out there talking about it can't be stopped, and the potential next president of the United States is like super in bed with tech anyway. It's like, how long before you just get chipped and you don't get to access your own brain and you don't get to store your own information natively, and like all of your thoughts are just outsourced to cloud computing, and we're transhuman by default just when we're born.
Yeah, that does seem to be what professionals in the tech space see as the new frontier for technology, is the human body. Mm-hmm. And I think that Gen Beta, appropriately named, is going to be the testing ground for that. Not that most of them will have a choice in the matter. The one thing I'll say that gives me some hope is this is probably the first generation that will be largely born and raised to Gen Z parents. And I think a lot of Gen Zers who will have kids, which isn't many of them, but the ones who will have kids are already making a decision that goes against the grain, generally speaking. And I think that they have ambitions to parent their children in a way that resists basically, you know, fostering them out to the technology that's being introduced to us currently. Like, I think a lot of Zoomers with ambitions of starting their own families recognize what is happening and at least in their own small way want to resist allowing their children to be a part of that. And the biggest privilege that you can have as a Gen Beta, member of society is having parents who protected you. And it's not something that you have any control over as a child, of course, but that is going to be the most privileged class of human beings. It has nothing to do with wealth, of spiritual wealth. If your parents were clued into this and had the foresight to protect you from it.
I think it's important. I mean, I think about when my son was little and like he would always get in trouble at school because he was just this active kid. And one time he got in trouble at school for not sitting down during circle time. And I said to the teacher, well, what was he doing? He was running in circles. And I was like, well,
it's circle time.
It's circle time. Like, what are you talking about? Like, did you explain that circle time is where you sit on a circle and not where you run in circles? Because like we run around the park all the time. But there was a prevalence among teachers to always be recommending medications for kids. And me and his dad were always like, no drugs, no drugs. And they'd be like, well, you might want to consider getting him evaluated for this and that. And we were like, no drugs. You could kick him out of school if you want, but there's no drugs.
So you're saying just say no.
No drugs. Yes.
Well, we've already seen the results of that with millennials and Gen Z.
And I think that's good. Like, don't drug your kids.
Yeah, I think that the reason why I'm more optimistic about Gen Z parents is just because it's not the default state to have a family now. So if you're a Gen Zer who's going to have a family, it's because probably you intended to do that. And probably against the advice of your own parents, I would bet, in a lot of situations. The last thing I'll bring up as just a reason why Gen Beta is like kind of doomed is because the elders that are giving them advice are totally clueless. And some of these luminaries were quoted in a recent piece published in ID magazine. Lots of podcasters and influencers and celebrities were asked to give their advice to Gen Beta, who just entered the world. And here are some of their responses. Jeremy Corbyn said, "You're coming into a world with the most incredible levels of stress, inequality, environmental destruction, and threats to world peace. But you're also coming into a world of the most incredible beauty with the joy and genius of humanity and nature. You'll grow up watching and learning about these many contradictions. I hope you will discover your creative self and inspire others to help build a kinder, cleaner, safer world. Welcome." That sounds like a PSA.
It's no good, yeah.
And then Hassan Piker is another one who was asked for his advice for Gen Beta. Let's hear it. He says, "Man is a social animal. Stay away from phones as much as you can." Naive of you to think that they will be interacting with phones instead of the phones interacting with them. "Make friends in the real world. Go to a public park. Enjoy public transit." Oh, once it's free. Be around strangers. Ask them for the time.
Don't be around strangers.
Ask them for directions. Rely on other people, even if you don't have to. Don't use LLMs or AI. That's good enough advice. Read a book. Write down your thoughts. You will instantly be smarter than your peers who engage in cognitive offloading. I think that really comes down to the way that a child is raised. I don't think Hassan Piker is going to have any effect on that. We also have a quote from Gillian Anderson in this piece. "Unless you're bringing compassion and tolerance, go back." Well, that's kind of bitchy.
You can't go back.
You can't talk to a baby like that. What the hell?
Maybe that person is just really pro-abortion.
Gillian Anderson, my goodness. Where is the vitriol coming from? Unless you're bringing compassion and tolerance, go back. Go back in the womb. Get back.
Tolerance is so overrated.
Jeez, lady. Another one said, "Start writing your show now." The hell does that mean? "Stack your money and stay true to yourself," says Sexy Red.
Start buying your house now.
Sexy Red is being asked for generational wisdom. Great. Wow. It's just like the whole piece is chock full of this useless drivel. And that's the primary reason why Gen Beta is doomed, is because the adults that are meant to guide them are idiots.
Well, I'll be a little positive and like to think that each generation gets a little bit wiser, a little bit smarter, and maybe beta will. They'll be able to adapt
Perhaps.
better.
I hope I eat my words saying
so.
all of this.
I hope so too.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.